Hello and welcome to this week's lecture. This week and next week we're going to be talking about information behavior. It's a fairly complex topic, and the articles I've given you to read this week and the ones I'll give you next week are fairly complex. This week more so because we're going to talk about models. And so I'm not giving you a reference journal to do this week, and you can use some of that time to work your way through these articles. They're not an easy read, but I think they're an important background as part of our discussion of reference services and information sources and services. So basically it's called information behavior or human information behavior. And what is it? It's a study of the interactions between people, the various forms of data, information, knowledge, and wisdom that fall under the rubric of information, and the diverse contexts in which they interact. So you can see that that is a pretty wide, pretty broad topic, a big area that we're talking about, because we're talking about what's going on behind the reference interview and when people search for information. There are reasons that people look for information, and their behavior follows certain patterns, or at least scientists have studied the patterns that they can see in what people do when they search for information. It adds to our understanding of how to help users find the information we need to understand what they're going through as they're looking for information. There's a huge amount of research in this field. Rutgers is one of the leading, has some of the leading scholars on this. And when I took the course in human information behavior, it's a whole course at Rutgers, and it just blew my mind. I just think that it's really useful to try and understand some of what's behind the theory that's behind why people, and especially why children and adolescents who you're going to be working with, why they do what they do during a reference transaction, or as they're doing research, or as they're looking for information. So why study HIB? Why did people decide in general that this was a good thing to begin to study? It was a switch to a user orientation. So in much of the research before that, it was what does the library think is what does the library want to offer? Whereas now we're thinking about what does the user of the library need? So there's that shift in orientation from library and what we want to give people to user and what they want, the people that are actually coming in to the library, and what they need in order to be able to satisfy their needs as they come in. It informs the reference interview, human information behavior. And this user paradigm, it's the angle from which you were working from your reference interview. You were actually, you'll actually be doing this as a user. You're trying to get at this user experience by actually being the person asking the question rather than the person answering the questions. So placing yourself in the role of the user, that's why I have you do that study, is to help you better understand the point of view, what it looks like on the other side of the desk from the reference librarian. So human information behavior studies that experience. The flying a light aircraft is actually, and the whole reference interview is sort of, reference interview research is part of human information behavior. So it helps you understand the situational contexts for the person that is coming in and asking the question. We talked about imposed queries a little bit. So is the person coming in looking for information that they're just curious about, or is this something they have to do for homework? And it makes a difference, as you'll read in one of your articles, it makes a big difference in how people how you approach what you're doing and some of the issues that you can have. You know, I talked about students not knowing exactly what the assignment is, not understanding what they're supposed to be looking for, not being engaged in what they're supposed to be looking for, because they just really don't care. Sometimes, as one of the articles talks about, giving students more choice in what they can research, and having a more open kind of reference question or research question could help, even with an imposed query, make it more interesting for the student. But HIB also helps you understand, like I said, the user experience. It helps when choosing your reference sources, because you get you understand the you're looking at, an HIB looks at sources, their interfaces, and their accessibility from the user point of view. How easy is it to use something? You guys just turned in your database evaluations, and how those databases have been designed has been informed by human information behavior research, because they've looked at people actually using these sources and done surveys or looked at how they've used them. There's some really interesting technology they do when it comes to searching with eye technology that follows a person's eye movement, and they can see what part of the screen they look at first and how long they spend on different parts of the screens. This informs also a lot of the search engines, where things are placed on the screen in Google. And so where does your eye go to first, and what's the most valuable real estate, and what's going to catch your eye first. So it can be used both to improve interfaces for research and also as a way to help Google and other search engines figure out where they want to put stuff. And it helps with the designing of your reference services if you understand. And by reference services, I mean everything from how you answer the questions, where you put your desks, what kind of material you have, can all be informed by human information behavior, understanding what the person on the other side of the desk, the person coming into the library looking for information, the more we understand what their experience is and what they're going through, the better off, the better we can serve them. So some key terms that you'll see used in the article and in talking about information, human information behavior in general. Information seeking. This is the I cannot say that word. Purposive searching for information as a consequence of a need to satisfy some goal. So this can be as simple as, I need to find out how tall the Eiffel Tower is, because it's a question on Jeopardy and I want to answer it before they do, but I don't know it, to I need to complete this assignment and therefore I need information on X, Y, and Z, and I need to do research. You may have heard me use the term query before. This refers to term or terms entered into the database. So we were talking, when we're doing those, when I have you doing things using Boolean, the whole search string of terms is your query. And even when we had the nested, where we did the ands and the ors, or the ors in parentheses with nested together, that whole sequence and bunch of terms is a query. And people use, if you think about yourself when you're searching, you often change the query in order to get better answers or different results. So you might put in, and some of you have articulated this in your reference journals, that, you know, I searched for this term and I didn't come up with anything, so I changed it to this query and added these terms, or used this Boolean, or put in quotations, did file type, whatever. And so you're changing your query. Relevance is how well the search results match the query or the searcher's needs. So overall relevance is this information I want, or is this not? Does this information have nothing in it that I want? But it's broken up into two separate measures in relevance. One is precision, how precisely the results match what you are looking for, and recall how exhaustive or how complete the results are. So are you getting just a small sample of what you want, of answers to your query? Or are you getting everything that could possibly be out there about whatever you're searching for? You want something that falls between the two. The best and most relevant, and believe me, there are tons of research on relevance and defining relevance. This is just a really simple definition of relevance. They spend a lot of time on this because there's a lot of work done on getting the interfaces, getting the computers to return relevant material that people want, and how do they tweak what's going on in the background so that you get the most precise and the most exhaustive and the best mix of precision and comprehensiveness in what the search results that you get. And then domain knowledge is another term that you'll see, and that's what a user knows about a topic, and that can really have an effect on how quickly and how easily you might find material. If you don't know what the special terms are for a particular field, and we all have our lingo, our words that mean nothing to people outside of a particular area of expertise, but would mean something to you as somebody within that area of expertise. So if you didn't know the correct terms that are used when talking about a particular aspect of a topic, you're missing some domain knowledge, and you may need to do a search which will bring up maybe those terms, and then lead to another search which will bring you even more relevant material. Or you may not even know where to begin. If you don't have any domain knowledge, you might not know if what's being returned is even what you need. So those are some terms to keep in mind as you're doing your reading and as we continue to talk about human information behavior this week and next. So we're going to look at a couple of models that are in the article in a little more detail. I'm going to talk about them a little bit more because these are not easy things to make sense of, but they underpin a lot of the thinking in human information behavior. T.D. Wilson was an early model, came up with an early general model of information behavior. Brenda Dervin's sense-making is used quite often, and Nicholas Belkin, anomalous states of knowledge. Those are the three we're going to look at today. Basically, what happens within these models is there's a gap in knowledge, which is an information need. I need to learn about everything about emus for my project. So I have a gap in my knowledge because I don't know anything about emus. Where do we find them? What are they? I don't know. So I'm going to go seek information. And after I get the information, find the information, I'm going to create new knowledge. I will now know that emus are birds, or a type of bird, a bird that doesn't fly, and they live in Australia. So you get more information. Now I'm thinking Australia or New Zealand. I think they live in Australia. So I have a gap in knowledge. I should really go and find out the right information there. So T.D. Wilson's general model of information behavior looks really kind of overwhelming. But basically, we can break it down to the context of the information need. Let's say that's a school assignment. And then there's an activating mechanism. In this case, it could be that the student is activated to do research because they have a school assignment. It could be that you have symptoms, and this is something we all do when we get a pain in our side. We go, that's our context of information need, and our activating mechanism is wanting to know more about the pain in the side to see if we need to go to the doctor. And so that activates us to go and search for the answers. And, you know, we're all quite certain that we're going to die based on what we find on the internet. And students are hopefully activated to do research. Sometimes they may not be, and sometimes they may be. Then the intervening variables. And I apologize if my mouse is going all over. It's not letting me see it here. Intervening variables are next across the top boxes. And these can be all the variables that come into play when searching. Do they even know how to use a school library? What have their experiences been up to that point? How old are they? The demographic, are you talking about K-2 users who's never used an encyclopedia before? Are you talking about somebody who is who's an ESL learner and is having trouble deciphering the words in the resource? Do they have a psychological barrier to asking for help? We all experience that. That we just don't want to bother somebody. We talked about that. Role-related or interpersonal. Maybe they're scared to approach the librarian because they've had a bad experience with that person or somebody in that role. They're afraid of authority. Environmental. Is there any barriers to them getting the information? We talked about how having dual monitors makes it easier to follow what you're doing, you know, or does the environmental setup make it such that you know, they don't know if you're the reference librarian, if you're the right person to ask. So all of these things can come between the two activating mechanisms. Then as we get to here, I'm not really going to go into this. That talks more about it in the chapter, but the activating mechanism may go back and forth. You might have multiple activating mechanisms and intervening variables, and become more self-sufficient in finding information. And then we go from these activating mechanisms to actually seeking information, trying to find the information, whether it be just picking a book at random to actively going online. All of these feed into this information seeking behavior that you can do an ongoing search, an active search, or just trying to, you know, see what you can pick up by wandering through the library. So then once you get this knowledge, you process it, and, you know, put it into your need. So, okay, I found out that one way I could have a pain in my side. I've gone here. I was afraid to ask the librarian, but I did kind of figure out how to look on the internet, and I kind of did a sort of a search, and now I'm putting it in, and oh, this is kind of scary. I think I want to go back through this again, but maybe this time I need more information, and I'll ask the librarian to help me find you know, a more appropriate resource that's not going to tell me I'm dying. So it can be a very iterative process. It's not something necessarily people go through once, which is why in you know, in talking about the reference interview, we always leave an opening for them to come back, because often once you begin figuring out what you need, then you have to go back and do more research, because either you've learned some of the domain knowledge, or you found another interesting angle to go on, or you didn't get enough information the first time around. So this can be a process that continues to go around, and maybe some of these psychological barriers are down, but there's still some demographic barriers that are up. So you know, basically this model tries to get at the fact that there's not just a need and a resource, that there's other things that are going on as the person walks into the library and or approaches even a database by themselves and tries to find information. Brenda Dervin's sense making is a little harder for me actually, but basically has some of the same ideas behind it. So a person is in a situation, they have history, experience, their horizon of knowledge, what they've known in the past and where they are in the present, again their domain knowledge, and what they know about what they're looking into, how much information they have. So sense making is implemented in terms of these 4 constituent elements that are here: a situation in time and space, because we're going to start from one place and move forward over time to figure out our answers. Which defines the context in which the information problems arise. Your context might be a school assignment. A gap, which identifies the difference between the contextual situation and the desired situation. So this is uncertainty here. And then an outcome, the consequences of the sense-making process, and a bridge that is some means of closing the gap between the situation and the outcome. So the bridge can be ideas, thoughts, feelings, emotions, stories, narratives that help us make sense of our gap. So they act as a bridge over the questions, confusions, muddles, and riddles that we have, and the outcome should be helps. Sometimes it's hindrances because we are not finding what we want and we have to go back again and start over, but impacts and effects. So again, we start out with a bit of knowledge, but knowing that we want more, and then our ideas and our thinking and our attitudes and beliefs can help us get to the outcome of finding an answer, can help us get over this gap and make sense of what we find. So this kind of more goes into the idea, what's going on inside your head as you find information and work to make sense of the information and where it fits in your own worldview. I find this to be the least useful to me of the models, but it's pretty well known, so I feel like I need to introduce it to you, and I totally understand if you don't get it. Just be aware that there is something called sense making and that it does underpin some of the ideas behind reference work. I find a little more, this one makes a little more sense, Anomalous States of Knowledge by Nick Belkin. The important thing is it helps us understand why users struggle to formulate questions. We don't know what we don't know when we start. So you start from a certain position, and again, this is the idea that you have a certain store of knowledge that you start with, and everybody's store of knowledge and therefore image of the world generated by that store of knowledge is not the same. So you and I, no two people have exactly the same background, experience, and knowledge. So your particular background leads you to a particular state of knowledge about X, Y, or Z. And you need to you need information in order to change your conceptual state of knowledge. And the generator, I messed up here because this is a two-way model. The generator's image of the world is the database the print book, whatever. The user's image of the world is you as the person seeking information. Both are conceptual states of knowledge that need to meet in the middle with some understanding of the knowledge that the information turning into new knowledge. So this anomalous state of knowledge means you don't you know you need something, but you don't know what you need. So you put in a search in the database, the text comes back, and in between here, hopefully the two meet. And this is where relevance comes into play, that in the text and the request need to find a way, they need to match, or they need to work together in order to decrease your anomalous state of knowledge and increase what you do know, and maybe increase your ability for the next request to be more useful. Understanding that a person is in an anomalous state of knowledge. They have a certain conception, they have a need, but they need they don't know exactly what they need to know, because you don't always know when you're searching what you need to know. And therefore, the first request can be something that doesn't make any sense when you finally realize what they're actually looking for, because they didn't know what they were actually looking for. So there's this idea that you just kind of work towards it, and work towards trying to figure out what you want to know. And sometimes it takes multiple, and again, it could be because of domain knowledge, it could be because you're not asking the right questions, it could be because with imposed queries, it could be because you don't know the right questions to ask, because you really don't know what you're trying to get at. And this model is used to work on databases, because this side of the model works to satisfy the user's side of the model. So if the user is putting in a request, the database has to be able to return something, even and returns the request, returns information based on the request. So and then tries to learn. There was a lot of work being done when I was taking human information behavior, like understanding, and you can see it now in the results of it, because Google didn't used to say, do you mean, or give you suggestions, but because there's been work done with these models, understanding that people don't always know what they're asking, the database is trying to satisfy your requests and understand and predict what you might be requesting. And that's why you see the drop-down menus in Google, where it's suggesting different terms, because it might be something you've researched before, or other people have searched before. So these databases are trying to learn how to address your uncertainty about what you want by giving you helps. And so it's interesting. And I don't want you to like pore over these models. I just want you to be aware that they exist, and aware of what the work is going on behind the improvements in databases, and behind what people are experiencing when they do when they're looking for information. When they're looking for information. The article I give you to read goes into Carol Kuhlthall's ISP, which I want to put off to discussing until we look at the ISP and the Big Six in a later lecture, because I feel like they kind of go together. But she works more solely from the affective, how the user is feeling as they go through these stages of information seeking, which is very useful also. But I don't want to add that on to these models that we're looking at here, that kind of try to give you an idea of the holistic environment in which people have and try to solve information needs and problems. So constructing knowledge is not just finding sources. It's taking the knowledge and constructing a personal understanding. So knowledge plus information equals new knowledge is something that is often talked about within human information behavior. So you have this knowledge, and as you can see, when you add knowledge, then you have a new kind of knowledge because you've added, you're at a different state. You've moved forward in space and time when you've learned something new and added it to what you already knew, and now you're in a new place and have a new understanding of knowledge. But a lot of what human information behavior is trying to see the user perspective, and this is really I think something that is much more accepted now. When because we always think about, I think there's other instances in which we try to understand a user's perspective that were not a way of thinking when human information behavior research was first begun, but it has had a huge influence on design and practice in reference and providing information, and providing it has had a lot of impact on design of databases, on understanding the reference interview, and on trying to make the library user-focused rather than library-focused. And this is important because if you want somebody, it's like marketing in a way. If you want somebody to come in and buy your products, you have to understand what appeals to them. And while we're not selling products, we want the experience. I guess maybe we can talk about it more as a retail experience. If you want somebody to come in to your shop and have a good experience and get what they need, then you need to understand what it is they are looking for. And this user perspective, rather than I'm going to stock, I'm always right and I know what the customer needs and I'm just going to have that here, and I'm not going to worry about how they feel coming in or what they might need. This is looking at what does my customer need, and what can I do for them when they come in. So the other article, most of what I have been talking about was in the Ross Todd article. This one's in Holtgren and Limburg. And actually, if you come to NJSL, Ross Todd comes to NJSL. He is at Rutgers. I had him as a professor at Rutgers, and you can meet him there. But Holtgren and Limburg did this review of research literature on children's information syncing, which I thought was really interesting. And they talk about how, again, imposed assignments can be difficult. There's misunderstandings, as we've talked about before, and sometimes the nature of these school assignments being very closed and not very challenging can impact how a student will do the research. If they're really interested in the topic, if the topic selection is more open and challenging, and they're guided through the searching process, then they'll be able to. And I think in here one of the interesting things they talk about is the outcome. How does the understanding they're researching and looking at the outcome of the assignment, is it a useful outcome, or is it just a way to spend time? So one of the things they talk about, I think, is really important when it comes to thinking about children and adolescent use of research materials is the student's knowledge of the tools. You may have students, depending on their age and depending on their background, you may have students who've never opened an encyclopedia before, who don't know how to use a dictionary, who don't know how to tie it onto a database. And if they don't know how to use a table of contents, they might just be stuck. But if they do know that they look in the catalog and they go to a book that seems useful and they open in the table of contents or the index, they will have a much easier time finding what they need. Terminology is also problematic because sometimes some databases use a more limited vocabulary. This is changing, but I can remember going to some databases use a more adult vocabulary, and this is again something that they've learned by watching how students use databases what it confuses them. So studying their information-seeking behavior, that you have databases that are more child-friendly, and so you don't have something that used to be Library of Congress. The subject heading for the Civil War was War Between the States, and if you didn't know that's what it was, then you were not going to find anything on the Civil War. Now with keyword searching, it's a little easier to find something when you put in the Civil War, but there could be students are still, the younger the student or the less experienced the student or the less well-read the student, the more difficult the terminology may be for them. They may see, they might put in Civil War and have material come back that they just don't understand. Or they can't spell right. If you don't have some kind of automatic spell checker in the database, then as much as, you know, Google sometimes overcorrects their spelling, if they didn't have that, if the databases don't help them with spelling, then they're really going to have a difficult time using the database. So it's important for them to either, which is why you'll see often that for the younger kids, it can be directory based, where the categories are there for them and they don't have to type in a word. They can do kind of a stepped search. I'm trying to think of the word I really want. Where you kind of drill down into, it's an animal I'm looking at, and the animal, you know, a mammal, if they even know those terms, but you know, cats, dogs, and then I want this breed of dogs, so they don't have to know how to spell dachshund. They can find a picture that looks like a dachshund, or they can, you know, guess by the DA, you know, that this might be the word dachshund. And then poor reading skills, poor skimming, they don't know how to skim for information. Those can totally affect how well a student is able to get information from out of the researches they do. And this is all part of their information-seeking behavior and their human information behavior, because the skills they have, their reading skills and their skills of picking out important words or skimming for important words can really, if they don't have those skills at a certain point, you know, it really could slow them down in terms of figuring out what they need and what's a good result and what's a bad result. Sometimes, you know, if you have them searching for 15 minutes and they spend that 15 minutes trying to decipher what's come up on the screen, they'll just pick anything that seems, because they can't figure out what's the best thing. So all of these things impact how children use, young adults, use and are able to get the appropriate and necessary answers to their questions to satisfy their information need while they're doing research of all different kinds. This doesn't just apply to structured, although a lot of what Hultgren and Lindbergh are talking about is a structured research, but that some of these barriers can also apply to just when they're trying to find out something that they're interested about. They just, you know, they get frustrated because they picked the wrong database that's too difficult for them to use. They don't know how to check a book and look in the index to see if it actually has information on what they're interested in. They might get a book on you know, a book on computers that is doesn't have anything about the particular area that they want to know about, or you know, if they're looking at dinosaurs or space, let's say they want to do planets, but they get one that's all stars. You know, that if they can't figure out by looking at the table of contents that it's not going to have enough information, or it's not going to have what they want, then it becomes difficult. So that's my overview of human information behavior, and don't get frustrated reading the articles. They really are difficult. The best way is to read them through once and then go back and read them again if you have time, but skip over what's really frustrating you so you don't get bogged down in details, but you can get a good overview. And I'll see you on the discussion board.